You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to The Adventuring Party. I'm Scarr.
I'm Owen.
And I'm Dave.
Or are we? How can we be sure?
Who in fact is stealing my thoughts?
So this is a me topic, so you know it's going to be a little weird and esoteric. But I've been having thoughts lately about how much of your fake, game where you sit around a table and talk about things that don't exist can be double fake before the single fake stuff starts to feel weird. Stuff like, how many illusionary walls can you have in your game before people start acting like crazy people and like poking every single wall that they touch with a 10-foot pole, interrogating it for its realness? Or how many times can you pass notes to other players before, they start asking for, how do I detect doppelgangers? How many NPCs can secretly be liches before it seems to stretch disbelief? Am I being crazy here?
No.
Or just paranoid?
Ultimately, the GM can act as an unreliable narrator. But there should probably be some plot or driving element behind it, rather than simply, I'm just gonna mess with your heads constantly. Or I'm constantly going to send illusion magic. If you basically hit at people with a lot of illusory stuff, their first reaction to everything will be, I disbelieve the illusion. And that may not be what you're going for. Overuse is never a good thing. I have done major long-term perceptual stuff twice in games that I ran. The first one was a Legend of the Five Rings game. And as people may or may not know, in Legend of the Five Rings, the game is pretty lethal. It is pretty easy for your character to die in combat because of exploding dice and not huge pools of wounds. And the exploding dice are D10s, so you can get your head chopped off pretty easily. Now, there are two advantages in the game, an advantage and a disadvantage in the game, which save your life once per session. The first one is Great Destiny. It costs 4 points, and it effectively saves you once per session. When you would die, you don't die. And eventually you're destined to do something great. And when you do something great, you get 8 XP and they remove your Great Destiny. So that's one thing you can do. The second option is, if you don't want to spend 4 points on it, you can buy Dark Fate, which gives you 6 points. And Dark Fate is exactly the same mechanically as Great Destiny in that it will save you once per session, but it means that ultimately something really bad will happen to be. You'll be reviled as a traitor, or you'll betray everything you believe in, yada yada yada. One of my players decided to take Dark Fate, and he also took, he was a Yogo, and the Yogo are cursed to betray that which they love the most. And he was a good Scorpion player, so he loved the clan the most. So I said, okay, what am I going to do with that? I should do, because he was basically saying, I dare you to do something. And I went, alright, well, let's see what I can come up with. And as part of the plot of the campaign, their party was contacted by another Yogo, a ninja called Yogo Ganjo. Mm. And he was basically played off them. He's a little bit of a foil. He would tell them things, but he would also get up to his own shenanigans. And they weren't... He was in the unwelcome ally sort of pile. At times he'd help them, give them information. At times he'd hurt them. And he'd sometimes do things that were against what they were after because he had his own agenda. And at some point, about 3 months in, one of the players noticed that there were 5 people in the party. The 4 of them had only met Yogo Ganjo when the other Yogo wasn't around. And the other Yogo had only met Yogo Ganjo when he was alone. And Yogo Ganjo assassinated and murdered a major Scorpion, a major Imperial Herald. And they injured Yogo Ganjo in the fight, and he gets away. And they run around to their friend's room, where they find their friend with a sword wound in his chest. He was Yogo Ganjo the whole time. Because the whole thing was he basically had a multiple personality from, well, not technically a multiple personality. Yogo often are born as twins, and his brother died in childbirth, and his soul was tangled up with his brother's soul. So they were like, okay. And that was the first time I did a kind of major perceptual plotline about that, where he actually had a twin brother who was possessing him periodically. And they eventually figured it out. And that was something I kind of workshopped and developed as I was running it. I said, actually, there's an opportunity here, the way I've run this whole thing, where Ganjo talks to the one Yogo on his own, and he talks to the others while the Yogo isn't there. So I was like, actually, I can do this with him. And that was my first track along. What you're perceiving is not necessarily the truth. And that worked pretty well. But I did it because the player had picked our fate and said, okay, what's the... kind of effectively do your worst. And I said, okay, well, this is my worst. You know? And in the end, the character was reviled as a murderer and as someone who killed Imperial Herald. And basically didn't have a terribly happy end. But that was the way it was.
Yeah, I know of a campaign, vampire campaign, where a character took, I think it was actually called Dark Fate as well, and amnesia, and that he eventually discovered that before he was embraced, he had a family and had forgotten about them entirely. And so that ended up coming back to bite him when his brother saw him, and was very concerned about him. But yeah, you can definitely do some interesting things if, I suppose, you've licensed to, because I think springing that on players. Well, unless they've reason to think there's some sort of illusionist or trickster deity or somebody powerful enough to deceive them to that level going around, it could be taken badly. You know, as lying to them.
Yeah, the thing is, like, if a player takes, I have amnesia, or I am doomed to madness or a bad end, they've sort of given you license, assuming they're aware of what they're taking. The
player was fully aware.
Yeah, that's fine.
The player was fully aware.
That's player buy-in. The player has handed you a rope and asked you to hang them. Clearly the drama of that impending subversion of what they thought was true was part of the point. But what I'm more worried about is stuff like, 10, 20, 30 sessions in, you say everything that happened since session 3 has been a dream because you touched the dream stone and there was no saving throw, and actually you've been killing innocent people, or something like that, or like it's just like, oh yes, you've invested 13 levels of XP into, joining the Purple Dragon Knights, becoming an honorable soldier, but actually this entire thing was the illusion of Velmo, the illusionist, and you've actually just given millions of gold pieces and a small army to a crazed lunatic, ha ha ha. If you're framing it as a mystery to solve, that's one thing, because then people know that there's something going on here. You've sort of tipped your hand and said there's something to figure out here, and then it can be about figuring it out. But it's sort of the sudden twist reveal where, because of whatever circumstance, either be your plot or a very, very odd circumstance in a particular artifact or dungeon, or hacking. Like, say someone, actually, someone's just hacked all your memories because you uploaded your brain with memory chips, so they can just make you believe things now. Like,
So,
go ahead.
one thing I did, second campaign was an Hearthstone campaign, and I had a bunch of people come together and ask me, "Hey, could you run something for us?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll run some Hearthstone." And then everyone came to me and said, "I'm a bit busy at the moment, so I won't reliably be there every session. But there's 6 of us, so 3 to 4 of us should be there every session." And I said, "Okay, let me have a think about that. I'm happy to run it, but I want a reason why people are kind of fading in and fading out." And I went back to them and I said, "Okay, that's no problem." And when the players were at the session, their characters were there. The other characters, the players had no memory of while they weren't at the session. And their brains would fill in an explanation for who did what if they needed to remember something.
Oh.
So the whole thing was, there are 6 characters. If 4 of them are there, your party was always 4 people. If 5 of them were there, your party was always 5 people. And it went on like this for a couple of months. And they eventually started to figure out what had happened. And in Hearthstone, there are kind of pseudo-Lovecraftian monsters called horrors. And horrors are the big bads of the setting. And horrors can do things called horror marking you, where they put their mark on you and can influence you or do something to you. So encountering them is very dangerous. And they've been marked by a greater horror called Pain. And Pain's thing was, he could take somebody into his dimension and torture them. And while they were there, no one could remember they existed.
Oh,
That
wow.
was Pain's thing. And an extended plot line they realized they were involved with was the daughter of the Dwarven King was missing. And the players were going around trying to find evidence of where the daughter was. And they had a big, long investigation. And eventually, they tracked it down to... Okay, so she got on this skyboat out of the capital city. And she flew north to this port. I think that was the first place she went. So let's go there and see if we can track her down. And they went to that port in their skyboat. And they tracked down the captain of the skyboat. And they meet him up and go, "Okay, we want to know where the princess is." And he's like, "Are you having a laugh?" And they're like, "We want to know where the princess is. Who took her?" And he's like, "Guys, this is kind of a joke. You're really doing this." And they're like, "We want to know where the princess is." And he goes, She got on your ship. Like 2 months ago. At which point the party realise she's also been horror marked and stuck in Pain's dimension.
Uh-oh.
And they just couldn't remember the fact that they had her.
Oh, God.
Which sets up for the eventual confrontation with the horror. Where effectively they trick it into the real world to kind of banish it, and get the horror marks off themselves. So that was another one where I basically went, okay, well, people aren't going to be there. I should do something with that. I'm not just talking about the awkward thing of, oh, that person he's an NPC this week. These 3 people are NPCs this week. It's like, I'm not doing that.
It's always awkward.
I'm not managing like extra PCs. I'm not giving people other extra PCs to trundle around with. They're just not going to exist when they're not here. Now, why would that happen? And I came up with the idea for the horrors. So there was a whole thing of it. It was an extended mystery and plot line that they eventually figured out. This is what's going on. And there was a useful aspect to the mystery there where they eventually teased it out. And there was a big reveal. And it was genuinely big reveal. The players came out, oh man, this is a whole different problem to solve, which propels you into the end game then, which is kind of fun. And then the next campaign I was running, Iron Kingdoms, they realized the bad guy they were fighting was the same horror. They're like, wait, what? And yeah, he came after you again. And they're like, what do you mean again? I was like, stuff's weird, alright. So yeah, that was fun. But that was like 2 times I've kind of done the whole perceptual thing of, what you're remembering isn't necessarily what happened. And finding that out is an important bit of discovery, and something that's going to drive the campaign on. You know, I didn't like, I told them right from the second, if someone isn't here, you do not remember them. And they eventually started to figure out what the problem was, because other people, it was them, the people who were tied up were horror marked forgot. Everyone else remembered, and they would start asking them, where's that other guy you had with you the last time, the big fella? And they're like, I don't know who you're talking about. And eventually they started to figure out the inconsistencies. So that ended up being the plot of the game. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's very specifically a mystery that we solve. It's not a surprise reveal that comes out of nowhere. It's like, no, this has been set up, this has been hinted at, there are clues to find.
Yeah.
But
you can do a big reveal when you realise you're working for the bad guy all the time. That's fine. That is fine. You can have a big reveal. There's nothing wrong with a big reveal. There's nothing wrong with, you thought you were working for the good guys, you're actually working for the bad guys. That's a classic. You just have to give them the opportunity then to turn the tables. That's fine. So long as you let them turn the tables and get their revenge, it's fine. It is absolutely fine for you to do that. So long as they get the opportunity to get their own back, and they get their own back consistently and thoroughly, it's grand. It really is. There's the problem is when you don't let them get their own back and you don't let them turn the tables. That's when there's ill feeling. There might be a little bit of, ooh, I'm really annoyed at the time, but the really annoyed is often, haha. It's like, you as the GM shouldn't be gloating that you outsmarted the players. That's childish and silly. What you should be doing is you're setting up a situation for the players to win in. Because you've cheated, you have to then let the players get their revenge. And if the players get their revenge, they're always happy. They beat the bad guy. Yeah. That's how it works.
Yeah, I find it's pretty common for players to get quite vengeful towards enemies who've screwed them over, and messing with their heads is generally up there on that list of things players get annoyed with. Or at least PCs get annoyed with. If there is a distinction and difference there.
Well, yeah. The main thing though is it remains sort of an in-world thing to worry about. It's just you want to avoid a situation where you put in sort of a dissonance where, say, a player has figured out the problem, but they can't act on that because their character doesn't know. That could be something pitfall you want to watch out for. You don't want a situation where, I've seen The Matrix, I know what hacking your brain is like, but your character's has 1 dot in smarts. They can't make this cognitive leap, and you have no evidence. All evidence is automatically deleted by the agent who's living in your back pocket. You want to be very sure that that sort of I guess I have to go along with it until the big plot reveal. If a player figures it out ahead of time, then you need to drastically reduce the time between them figuring it out and when their character figures it out. You don't want the bad horror movie thing where the title of the movie is Ghost Ship, but you're 90 minutes in before they realize we're on a ship full of ghosts. You don't want that disconnect between audience and character, as it were.
It is a light touch thing. It can't be constantly beating them over the head, especially if you can't if everything's an illusion, the players just get sick of it. But if it happens occasionally, and there's one bad guy that uses illusions all the time, every time you stab him, it's an illusion, and that's his trick, and you eventually get around that, players are happy. They are perfect. If you basically you're fighting Loki all the time, and every time you stab him, It's an illusion, and he stabs you in the back, and the player invests in the, stabs the guy under the shoulder to stab him in the back, and he gets him that time. That player is so happy. They are so happy when they do that. They're like, I got you and your stupid tricks. That's all they want. They want to beat the bad guy who keeps outsmarting them, and they want to do it by outsmarting him again, or just being so strong that they smush him. They want the satisfaction of beating up the bad guy. If you let them beat up the bad guy, they're perfectly happy. And the longer you go on with the bad guy being super clever, the more satisfying the beating has to be. And that's all they want. They want to catch out the bad guy and get him. And if they catch out the bad guy and get him, they're happy.
Yeah.
You have to give them that moment, though, that they definitively catch and beat up the bad guy who had been tricking them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like there's a certain amount of preparation for that payoff, and yeah, I think a lot of players would appreciate that. Like, once things are said and done.
If it's a mystery that they are trying to solve, you need to be ready to go, well, if they actually figure out the mystery, you need to be ready to go with the reveal on their terms. Like, if they solve it on their terms, then they get to solve those terms. But if it's like some kind of ability, then they should have some way to resist it or figure it out. It's just like, even if it's something where, like, yeah, you have to poke the wall, at that point they get their search check or perception check to disbelieve the illusion. It shouldn't just be, this is just an always works illusion. Your brain automatically makes you think there's a wall there, and you feel it under your skin, even though it's nothing but magic. Like, you need to make sure that you separate a useful trick in an adventure versus a ongoing plot device, which, sure, if you want to have a plot device where it's no saving throw, you have to, figure out which of your party is harboring the mind spirit or whatever. That's fine, but you need to treat those as different things. You can't just give plot powers to an enemy just to make them more effective or more annoying.
Yeah, agreed. If you're arbitrary about it, you're compounding cheating with more cheating to win over the players, and that's not great.
But I do think one of the actual problems is just the player distance. Like, if a player can see, there's something contrived here, something is happening here that I can see an issue going on here. Either there's some possession, or my memory of what my character did is not gelling up with what the GM is telling my character remembers, or I could see the notes being passed between the guy who went off on his own into the lair of the doppelgangers, but I'm being told again and again, I have no reason to suspect it. Like, that's dissonance. And you really want to avoid that, because I'll just shatter people's belief in the game if, I know something, but I can't put that knowledge into my game actions. So that's sort of the thing you have to be aware of is, if someone you need to give them some way to figure out, like, or at the very least make it clear, why can't you express this knowledge and things. So, like, turn it into a challenge that they have to overcome. Like, if you're go ahead.
There's no problem with a bad guy being unbeatable until you figure out how to beat him. That's a standard progression. You basically, maybe there's a guy you can't beat by getting stronger. You have to figure out it's their trick or its trick before you can fight it. And once if you make that satisfying and you basically laid the hints out there, like, that's great, because the players get to figure it out, feel smart, then beat the bad guy. And so long as they get to figure it out and beat the bad guy, they are happy with it.
You can't just throw, free outs to the bad guy just because you feel, he needs a W.
No, you have to have a you work out why he's unbeatable.
Mm-hmm.
Implement that mechanically. And then you figure out how you beat him. And when they figure out how they beat him, they beat him. But until, you can have someone who's just like, you can't beat him until you figure out how his powers work. If you do that properly, it's perfectly fine. Because you make it clear nobody can beat him until they figure out how his powers work. And there's a number of bad guys like that. You can look at, sometimes it's done successfully, sometimes it's not. And if you, there should always be a reason. A power can seem unbeatable until you figure out how to beat it. And then you're like, that's its weakness. I hadn't figured out the weakness yet, but now I figured out the weakness. And you're like, okay, I figured out the weakness of how this person's power works. Now I can beat them. I could not beat them until I figured out that weakness. If you look at a lot of anime has characters like that. JoJo is a great example of an anime or manga that has a lot of bad guys with a power, and they seem unbeatable, and then you figure out the power is, and you're like, now I can see how you beat it. Or Brandon Sanderson stuff works like that, where you're like, these guys are unbeatable. No, it's not. There's ways to beat them. It's just part of the game is figuring, or part of the plot or the game is figuring out how you beat them. Because they have a weakness. They're just not going to... And unlike some bad guys, they're not going to tell you their weakness, or they're not going to write it down anywhere. So you got to figure it out. What is their weakness? And the GM has to have that figured out beforehand. If you do that right, you build a more satisfying narrative. Don't figure out that he's invincible, then figure out his weakness. Alright? Figure out both at the same time, then implement him and run him in the game that way.
And then what if the players come up with a similar but not exact way to beat his things
if it is genuinely would work, think about it, and if you think it'll work, you let him win. And if you think it wouldn't quite work, you maybe do something, give him an extra bit of information by doing it, and have him just get away. That's fine too. Don't end it like Fallen. Do not end it like Fallen. You have to actually have them win at the end.
Fallen's a great film, but it is,
but it's a bad RPG scenario.
Oh yeah, no, that would be a rough one. Just thinking about genres, superheroes. A classic trope for superheroes and supervillains is their weakness. I mean, Superman's kryptonite. And there's various villains who if you like cold or heat can do serious problems to them. Actually not quite superhero, but the Terminator films. The Terminators seem utterly unstoppable until you figure out how to stop them.
Yeah. And it's what I don't like is there are good and bad iterations of the Terminator. In the original Terminator, they wear the Terminator down through damage until they eventually beat it. And it gets worse and worse, weaker and weaker as time goes on. In the second one, they get it somewhere either super hot so they can actually melt the metal and kill it that way. There are other Terminator films where, Terminator Dark Fate was terrible because the Terminator was invincible until the last scene when, now we can beat it and kill it. And there was no explanation given about why it was. That's bad. You have to have, here are the set of powers, here are the strengths. Are you wearing it down over time? That's one way to beat it. Or did you figure out, okay, we can't beat it by shooting it. We can't beat it by chopping it. We can melt it though. But that's the only thing that's going to do it, and we've got to hold it in the place. We got to fight it somewhere where we can melt it, and that's the trick of it. You have to let the bad if the bad guys have a perceptual thing, and it's all if it's always an illusion, and every time you stab Loki, it's an illusion. Fine, you can do that for a while, but you have to figure out what are the limitations on his illusion powers? How many illusions can he have up at once? What is the way around this, Are they based on sight? Are they based on smell? Are they based on taste? Is there a way around this one?
Do you just stab the point that's 1 meter to the right of the illusion, and that's where he's going to be?
Yeah. One time my brother was fighting an invisible monster, and he switched off all the lights in the room and said, "Now we're even." And I was like, "Yep, that works." You know, that's a good solution. You know, now we're even. And you know, that's basically that was. You want to let them do stuff like that. If they do something genuine, clever, you can be like, you know what? Yep, absolutely. But when you're doing perceptual stuff, don't cheat too much. Work out the powers beforehand and let them win at the end. You can futz a little bit. You can cheat a little bit. But you should ultimately, they have to win. If they win at the end, they're happy. If they don't win at the end, they will be annoyed.
Yeah.
And don't drag it on too long. Not too long. You know, not too long. You want to peak it at the right time. You know,
pacing is important.
Yeah.
I'd just like to tie in something from earlier. That a sudden and arbitrary victory would be about as annoying as it is, a truly invincible enemy they can't win against. Because if suddenly, like in that film you mentioned, that the GM says, "Oh, now you can beat him, or her, or it."
Yeah, so it's like it was completely immune to bullets before, but now just because it's the time for the big fight, now the bullets work fine. Don't worry about it. Like that's.
Now, if it's truly a time-based thing, then you have to it can only be harmed by bullets dipped in water that's been shone on by the light of the full moon. Well, then next full moon, you're taking the enemy to town. If you figured it out.
Yeah. Well, so it's just like it shouldn't just be a dramatic convenience. It's just like. It shouldn't be. He is now vulnerable to bullets because it is time for the big final boss at the end of the adventure. There should be a definite causal link between the abilities he had at one point and the abilities he has at another point. Like, don't pull a weakness out of nowhere either, because again, you're breaking this firm solitude where the players have gone into the fight. It's like, how do you do this? How do you do this? And it's just like, I shoot a gun at him and it works. And it's just like, why? You're trying to preserve the secondary world, as you know, pretentious scholars will call it, and that means like narrative pacing is great, but you know, Solitude is also arguably even more important. It's just like because you want your players to be invested in what's going on, and having say, well, this is the dramatic time for a climactic battle. You want an emotional climax, not a mechanical climax. Like, you know, if you undermine like the belief in the world just because this seems like the right time for a big fight, or for a villain to just fall over dead. You know. So,
yeah.
Any final thoughts on this sort of trick?
It's ultimately a trick. It's a little bit of it's a way to present a bad guy or present a mystery that kind of will make the players question some of what they've been told and some of what they've experienced, which is quite cool. I wouldn't overdo it. I don't do it that often. I've done it a bit, and I'm like, it's a good trick occasionally, and it is to be used as a sometimes food. If you do it all the time, people won't believe anything and will question everything, and it actually becomes less effective. It works best when it's a surprise. When something's up, and they eventually figure out the surprise, I wouldn't do it more than once or twice. And then you give it a year or two of standard games, whatever, and then do it again. But kind of once or twice, and then take it out, and then put it back in again as something different.
To echo what was said earlier, plan out what is going on. Like, know yourself what is going on, even if the players and PCs don't. Like, don't try not to make it up as you go along, because that's a hiding to nothing. And if people, like with TV shows, if people involved realize, they have no idea how this can end, they're just making it up as they go along, it kills the satisfaction.
Yeah. As I say, like, you remember at the end, like, you want your players to, the players' characters to, if not win, certainly get through to see another day, or and you want your players to be having fun. So be careful of this sort of denial-based gameplay, and also like don't. Information can be very difficult to convey in a RPG setting, particularly these days when we have distractions, phones, Discord disconnects. People can't just miss clues. Don't rely on a single clue. It's just like, the side of the purple rose will tell you what is true, what is reality. And if people don't hear, people might not connect the euphemisms you're using for purple rose. If they're focused on, well, there's a troll in front of me. Oh, it's an illusionary troll. How is I supposed to know that? Oh, he had some form of violet pumpernickel in his lapel. I wasn't really paying attention to the the description of his minutiae of his dress, because I was trying to figure out how many troll slaying swords I had. Don't punish players for not scanning every pixel of your setting, because information can be hard to convey. Things. So don't be afraid to be a little bit more explicit and start giving things away. Like, I know if you want your bad guy to seem like a super genius, that's fine, but like, most villains aren't actually super geniuses. They're just people who have who got powers and use them to their satisfaction. They don't need to actually be all that smart. They just need to be smug about how they got there where they are.
Smart is relative. So if it's smart for them, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've actually, seen through this illusion of illusionism, and our memories are actually have been altered, but for the better. So, if you'd like to tell us how it was your plan all along for us to release this episode, you can hit us up on our social media. But for now, this party's over. Or is it? It is.
Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter. Or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. But you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.